This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, I am the Blood Guy and welcome back to another serial killer review. This is a movie that I've actually known about for quite a while, and I actually meant to pick this up quite some time ago. Actually, I think back when I was getting Giallo films, because this is an Arrow release. Of course, I was picking up a lot of Arrow films. It's not a Giallo, obviously. But I didn't realize it had ties to a real-life serial killer. I just thought it was a fictional film about a killer. But then, as I was looking up films about real-life serial killers for that run-through I've been doing, which is now part of the regular channel programming, this film came up, and I did not realize it was loosely based on a serial killer that I'm very fascinated by. It would be, if it's not a top 10 case, it would be in the top 15 for sure. So, of course, I went to the store, I ordered it, but then as I was doing some reading, I kept seeing like, no, it's actually a fictional film, loosely based on him, so I thought, oh, is it like Chainsaw Massacre? It just takes a little bit of pieces, but it's a completely separate story. But everything I saw had the killer's name and face around it. Like, no, it's about this guy. But then I saw that, no, the main character's name isn't even the same name, and it's loosely based on, so I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I thought, okay, maybe it's going to be more like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, just enough similarities to say it's based on this guy. But watching it, no, there's enough to say, no, it's based on this serial killer. And I also mentioned Henry because this has sort of been called England's response to Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, because this came out in 1989. And it's shot in a very similar way. It's a very raw, gritty, unflinching look at a serial killer, or portrait of a serial killer. And it's the film Cold Light of Day. And yes, this is the Arrow release, which, really cool cover. If you saw my Giallo reviews, you know I am a sucker for these older, more original covers, but I really do think that looks cool. And it is loosely based on the British serial killer, Dennis Nilsen, which, as I said, if he's not a top 10, he's top 15 for sure. Known as the Muswell Murderer, maybe more so the Kindly Killer. I think that's his biggest moniker, the Kindly Killer. I think because he was known to be so polite to everyone around him. But since 1991, he's kind of been known as the British Jeffrey Dahmer. And not in this video, I'm not going to say similarities to Dahmer, but I do plan on making a video going over the similarities between the two, because there are a lot. Not just in their MO, or what they did to their victims, or their victim profile. There's actually a lot of similarities. So yeah, it is kind of like Henry. I mean, his name isn't Dennis Nilsen in this. It's actually Jordan March. But the guy does look quite a bit like Nilsen. You can definitely tell that that's what they were going for. Really, the only difference is if they had made his name Dennis Nilsen, this would have been a pretty solid film about him. I mean, it's really not all that fictional. There are obvious differences. I mean, yes, in real life, he committed his murders in 2 different attic flats, over the course of 5 years. Whereas in the film, it takes place in 1. Of course, it doesn't show all his murders, which, is 12. He confessed to 15, but 3 of them ended up being that he fabricated them. It really only shows a few, but it has this real gritty look to it. So much so that even some scenes are framed unconventionally, like sort of this weird downward corner angle, where like if he's standing at the bathroom sink, some of his body is out of frame, which gives it this very weird voyeuristic look to it. Has a very fly on the wall type feel. Even the score is kind of similar. Not so much the piano in Henry, but like how Henry has that dun dun behind the piano. This has a similar score to that, but the acting is unflinching and raw. It's not a very gory or violent film, which, considering who Dennis Nilsen was and his crimes, there are scenes with organs being dumped in a drain or him about to dismember someone. Good effects for the budget and the time. Well, I shouldn't say the time because 80s had awesome gore. But not just the gore effects, but Nilsen also would save bodies for weeks to months. And the first victim he kills in this, he does save throughout most of the movie. So when he does finally dismember him, just the coloration of the body is very well done. So this was directed by Fiona Louise, which this actually comes with a few of her short films, which I have not checked out. And I haven't seen anything else she's done. I can't even click on her name. Produced by Richard Driscoll. Now, I feel like I've seen that movie before. Nothing he's directed. It doesn't even have a list of things he's produced. Professional name Stephen Crane. Well, even so. It stars Bob Flagg as Jordan March, our stand-in for a Dennis Nilsen. Which, in fact, he did look a little bit older than Dennis at some times. And he actually, especially during the scene in which he's waiting in his apartment to be arrested, not so much here, but in other scenes, he looks a lot like the guy that played Gary Ridgway in The Capture of the Green River Killer. But also stars, I didn't mean to do that. Martin Byrne Quinn, Jeffrey Greenhill, Mark Hawkins, Claire King, and Andrew Edmonds. Nigel Axworthy did the cinematography, and Paul Stewart Davies did the score. Which I'm just going to see what else he's done. I guess he's worked with the Beatles, or he was given an award of excellence by a Beatles producer. So no, I read that wrong. It premiered at Venice in '89, got its London premiere in '90. It's only 80 minutes, and it goes by at a quick pace. It is structured differently than Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, because where that is literally like a week portrait, takes place during a week, just comes right in, and it just ends with him riding off into the sunset. This is told through like a interrogation flashback. He's arrested in the beginning. During the interrogation, he starts to tell his story, and then that's what we see. We cut back from time to time. There's really nothing about his backstory. The only thing it really gives, which kind of makes sense, we get a flashback to his grandfather's death and how that profoundly changed his life when he was 6 years old. Now, that is a true aspect to Dennis Nilsen. His grandfather died when he was 6. He idolized his grandfather. He went to his wake, and that was his first, that was his introduction to death, and really led him down this spiral. That's really the only backstory we get to this Jordan March character. The only other things it gives is it mentions he's a public servant or civil servant working at a job center in unemployment. It doesn't really make mention of his homosexuality really at all. Obviously, and actually, the bar he goes to, I don't even know if it comes out and says it's a gay bar. In fact, a lot of the people he meets in this is actually at a diner. But we see, his first victim, I think his second, and then there's a couple where it just shows him meeting them, and then it shows him just storing body parts under the floorboard, so it cuts out everything. It doesn't get near as bloody or graphic as the actual story. Not that I was expecting it to. I would probably say Henry is still a harder hitting film, more violent film, more graphic and gory film. This one kind of tries to. It almost feels like it's trying to paint some tragedy around Nilsen, as it shows him killing, or shortly after, it'll show him crying, breaking down, him being grossed out by sometimes by the sight of a dead body, or having to dismember it. Which I have read that Nilsen wasn't really a fan of the actual uh, dismemberment and disposal of a body. It was just sort of a means to his end. Kind of like how Dahmer didn't like killing, per se. He just liked what he could do after. But yeah, it doesn't get into the psychology of it at all, which I wasn't expecting it to. It's very matter-of-factly, which, excuse me, really goes well with just how it's filmed. I mean, it's very voyeuristic, so you would expect it to be a bit more matter-of-factly. And I do think that makes it more hard-hitting and effective, like Henry. I think if they tried to delve into the psychology with a lot of flashbacks or try to explain why, it would have offset the feel of how it's shot, and I think it would have kind of dampened the effect a bit. I mean, if you want to get into the psychology, and this is something I haven't seen, but I'm definitely picking it up, there's a 3-part British series called Des, which was his nickname, starring David Tennant as Dennis Nilsen. That, I would imagine, gets more into the psychology, whereas this is just more like a fly-on-the-wall portrait. And I've seen pictures. David Tennant looks awesome as Nilsen, and I will be ordering that soon and definitely be checking that out. I'll definitely be reviewing that. There's also the documentary on Netflix, the Dennis Nilsen tapes. It's not part of the Conversations series. It's actually called Memories of Murder. I will be watching that and reviewing that as well. I haven't really liked reviewing documentaries because you're really just relaying the information. I have reviewed one. I've reviewed The Confession Killer. But as I'm making serial killer stuff more part of the regular programming on here, I will be watching and reviewing that as well. As far as books, of course, he is a high-profile killer, very notorious one. So, of course, he's in every comprehensive encyclopedia, which, of course, I have a number of those. But the smaller books I have, like this, gets more into the psychology of Nilsen. He has his own chapter in here. Mentioned it here as he's in the Ruthless Ripper category. He has a chapter in this, and in a book of Chambers of Horror, which he actually had 2. So, and again, almost like a dozen of these very large books. He's in every one of those. So the film, I actually was surprised. Now, can you get a whole lot from the Dennis Nilsen story by watching this? Probably not, but I could see this being a good stepping stone. If you don't know that much about him, or really just you know that he killed young gay men, stored him in the floorboards. If that's all you know, I could see this being sort of a starting point. Not that this is what I've said before, a bullet point film, because it doesn't take significant events. It really just kind of shows the kind of person that he is. Most of the film is fictionalized, as in really just the first and last victims are really the ones that are based on actual victims, whereas the other ones are more so just symbolic of the kind of person he would get and what he would do to them. So, in that sense, it's fictional, not super fact based. Even in the beginning of the film, it says, uh, it's in my notes, something to the effect of, it's based on a true story, but not based on actual events, but not an actual account. Excuse me. So when I saw that, I was thinking, oh, is this going to be more Chainsaw Massacre, Eaten Alive, Wolf Creek, where it's just a fictional story about a guy? But no, I was impressed overall. I would say this is more factual than Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, uh, by far. So yeah, I could see you getting some out of this, but definitely get a book or a documentary to watch after. There actually is an autobiography by Dennis Nilsen that came out called "History of a Drowning Boy" because he almost drowned when he was, I think, 6, and that was kind of a turning point. Which I don't own that, but I would love to get it. Uh, on top of numerous documentaries, I mean, I've seen Born to Kill. I've seen Most Evil Serial Killers on him. He's in. He wouldn't be in that one. I think he's in this documentary that I have. So I've seen a few, but not ones like the Netflix one. So it's shot great, especially if you like the low budget, gritty, almost like 80s snuff, almost like Henry. This would be a great double feature with Henry. It does feel like the British version of that film, but well acted, especially from the lead, Bob Flagg as Jordan March. Again, it's not gory, really. I mean, a couple scenes with organs and stuff like that, but other than that, not really. But well shot, well acted. It does get kind of artsy at times, like with its flashbacks. It kind of feels more like a dream sequence. A lot of juxtapositions of stuff. It's not as straightforward story wise as Henry, but yeah, I still thought this was a very good film. You really are kind of watching. I can't really say this is a film about like a descent into madness because he kind of just picks this guy up. They live together for a bit, and then he kills him. It it does kind of play on the fact that even Nilsen didn't really know why he killed. This has a very, like I said, matter of factly approach to it. But I could definitely recommend it. Definitely get the Arrow release. I'm sure people are going to say, oh, this is a Blu-ray. Well, good. I figured if I got the DVD, people would be like, take it back, get your money back, get the Blu-ray. As if it matters. But it looks great. This restoration, Arrow does a really good job at cleaning up and making them look new and improved while maintaining that grit, grain, and fuzz like an old VHS. So that's why I really like Arrow. So yeah, I'm sure it's not as informative or maybe not even as well acted or put together as the Des series with David Tennant. But as, like the first movie made about him, really, I think the only other one I can think of, there's one called The Black Museum. Not the old one with Orson Welles, but I think I saw something from 1988 called The Black Museum that I think it is or loosely based on Nilsen. But still, solid movie. I love the way it's shot. I love the way it looks, especially with its weird, awkward angles. Thought it was acted well, and it did have a good amount of historical accuracy to it. A lot more than I was expecting. So, Cold Light of Day, definitely a decent Dennis Nilsen film, but I am very excited to see the David Tennant one. So with that, I guess we'll get into the cliff notes and the film itself. So as always, I like to give a brief cliff notes or a brief summary about the killer that the film is based on. So Dennis Nilsen, known in England as the Muswell murderer, or more widely as the Kindly killer, but also the British Jeffrey Dahmer, killed at least 12 young boys and men between 1978 and his capture on February 9th, 1983. Known as a gay alcoholic loner, Nilsen would lure teens and young men, ranging from students to the homeless and runaways, to his attic flat with the promise of food, shelter, and alcohol. There he would strangle with a ligature, often to unconsciousness, then drown them in the tub or bucket of water. He would often save the bodies for weeks or even up to months, so he could lay with, watch TV, and eat dinner with, and talk to. Though he was adamant he never penetrated the bodies, he often engaged in self-pleasure with them, often with the mirror nearby so he could watch himself. Nilsen would also store victims' corpses under his floorboards, and when it came to dissect and dismember them, he would boil the hands, feet, and heads, so it would leave just the bones, and dispose of the organs. And dispose of the organs. In his first flat on Melrose Avenue, he would dump the organs in behind his home, and in his second, in Cranley Gardens, he would flush them down the toilet, causing a blockage and leading to his awareness to authorities. He initially confessed to 15 murders, all with detailed stories, but he later admitted to fabricating at least 3 of these. Since 1974, he was a public servant, working at a job center in the unemployment department. He spent 11 years in the military and was even a police officer for a short time. His crimes involving luring gay men of similar ages to his home in order to kill, practice his own necrophilia, dismember, and save body parts has led people to call him the British Jeffrey Dahmer. Though he was caught 8 years before Dahmer's crimes would be known, he was convicted of 6 counts of murder and 1 attempted murder and given a life sentence. He died at the age of 72 on May 12th, 2008. And so now we get to the film itself. And sorry if I kept clearing my throat, and I put something in my notes that looked weird, so that's why I stumbled. So it opens up with just shots of England, and we see officers showing up to this home. I don't think it was the same home that he lived in, but it does look very similar, if it's not. In fact, I think the one on Melrose Avenue was renovated since he lived there. I was just seeing if, yeah, it opens up with like shots like that. I could have swore there was pictures of the house in here. But yeah, you would think that this really was about Nilsen because it even has pictures of the real Nilsen and, you know, the digging up of like the drain or the septic, the plumbing system or whatever. So it shows officers going to this house where he lived in the attic flat. Shows him sitting there waiting, knock on the door. The guy says his name is Detective Chief Inspector J, which I was surprised because that was the guy working the case. His name was Peter J. So I was like, okay, maybe this is going to be more accurate than I thought. That's when we get the text. This film is based on actual events, but not on an account. Names have been changed to protect innocent parties, which, yes. However, the name of the final victim is still the same. So interrogation says he's a civil servant, worked at a job center, true. From 74 till his arrest in 83, he worked in the unemployment department at least 2 different locations, becoming executive officer in 82. As he tells the story, we flash backwards. There's no dates or anything, but we're at a bar. Again, I don't know if this was a gay bar. It never really comes out and says it. But, yeah, typical place where he picks people up. He meets a man, and then it cuts to them going to his place. Says he's an art student. His name is Joe. Yeah, some of his victims were students, mostly homeless and runaways. Jordan, I was trying to think of his name. Jordan March goes to leave, but his elderly neighbor, uh, he realizes he's had an accident, so he goes in, changes him, gets him all fixed up. I don't know if that ever happened. I'm thinking that's just a play on, like, to show the kindly killer, just show how nice of a person he was. It does reveal that Joe is gay and meets with men in public. Him and Jordan start to live together. So I started wondering if this was based on uh, David Gallichan, who was a 20-year-old that Nilsson dated for a while. Uh, it was outside of a bar. There was an altercation between two men. Nilsson broke it up. One of them was David. He brought it back to his place, and they started living together. And then I think they moved into the actual flat where he would start killing. I do believe that's how it happened. And I think it was with David that he got his dog Bleep. Bleep was a huge part of Nilsson's life. No dog in this film, which I was actually surprised. But yeah, they met in '75. He started killing in '78, and it then cuts to Joe asleep in bed, and Jordan just starts strangling him with a necktie. There was an argument about something. I forgot what it was. But yeah, he starts strangling him with a necktie. So I'm wondering if they were just combining some characters. Like, okay, it's David, but also a little bit of Stephen Dean Holmes, who was a 14-year-old. He was Nilsson's first victim. He was on his way back from a rock concert. Again, another thing about Dahmer, which I will make that video soon because there are a lot. But yeah, he was on his way back from a rock concert. Nilsson met him, brought him back to his place. They drank, and while he was asleep, Nilsson strangled him with a necktie. At least to unconsciousness. Then he put his head in a bucket of water and he drowned. Whereas here, after he's strangled, he lays Joe in the bathtub. And it then shows him laying with the body afterwards, which he will put him in the tub, one, to finish drowning them, but two, he had a thing for cleaning them before he did anything. So then it shows Jordan as a boy flying a kite with his grandfather. This is juxtaposed to his mother taking him into his grandfather's wake. It then shows, they're on the beach. Little Jordan's running around, and his grandfather has a heart attack. And he's about 6 years old. Yes, he did idolize his grandfather, and he even said that when he's not around his grandfather, his life has no happiness. It's just blank or sadness. His grandfather did die of a heart attack at the age of 62, but it was on Halloween while he was out fishing, and Dennis was not with him. But he did go to his wake. It was open casket, and his mother did say to him, he's sleeping, and he's gone to a better place. The movie does have her saying he's just sleeping. So it does show that significant event. Jordan storing Joe's body under his floorboards, whole. His first body was the only one not to be dismembered. All the ones in the first house, he would dispose the organs and stuff either near a fence behind his house or a nearby park. But when he would actually dispose of the bodies, it was during a bonfire, which he would also use tires to help cover the smell. But this 14-year-old Stephen was the only one not to be dismembered. So he was stored whole, as in the film. Shows Jordan with a female prostitute. I don't think that ever happened. I don't think he ever even tried to see if he had heterosexual feelings. So I'm not quite sure why that was put in there. Maybe he thought if he did that, he would not want to kill anymore. But in real life, he found out he was, or realized he was gay in his late teens. So I don't think that ever happened. Shows another man approaching Jordan at the diner that he frequents. They go back to his place. The man is strangled to unconsciousness with a hand towel and then held over the side of the tub underwater until he drowns. That's intercut with the interrogation of being asked if he could stop himself. Yes. Why didn't you? Because it was easy. I've already gone too far. Did you ever try to stop yourself? And I don't think he answers. Which Dennis Nilsen in real life was very matter of fact and very, not very remorseful sounding. Even though there is a scene where they're yelling at him to confess that he had sex with the bodies. And he says something to the effect, he starts kind of breaking down and saying, no, they were too pretty for that, or too beautiful for that. Which, yes, he would say that he would penetrate the bodies because he didn't want to offend the victims or offend the bodies. So that was something that he had. Also shows him retching at the side of a dead body. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe he was trying to show that he was only into the torture, not like into killing yet. But yeah, then he starts to dismember him. Decent effects for the budget. Good gore effects. Which I always thought he didn't. Well, he starts flushing them too. Which I don't think he actually started flushing the victims. I know he didn't until his home in the gardens. That was when he started flushing. Which I think was his 8th or 9th victim. And that was in 82. And it was when he, I think it was initially when he ran out of room under the floorboards. But, yeah, shows Joe back in his bed. He would take bodies out of the floorboards and, lay with them, watch TV with them. It doesn't show him, like, eating dinner with them or talking to them, really. Really just kind of shows him laying with them. And then one scene is shown by, shooting the mirror, its reflection. He's got, like, the body sitting on the toilet. He's kneeling in front of it. He's masturbating. Which, also true. Yeah, calling out of work for time with the bodies and for disposal. True, he would always call out if he had to kill, or if he had to dispose of or want to spend time with the bodies. He did do it a lot. And yeah, it shows him kneeling in front of the body, pleasuring himself. It kind of pans over, so we really see it through the reflection of the mirror. He did have a thing for setting up mirrors so he could see himself, but he would angle it in such a way so he couldn't see his face. In fact, I think it was his last victim, who was also named Steven. He had like 3 or more mirrors all around him. He really liked the idea of seeing himself. Read all that. Meets another man out in an alleyway that immediately cuts to him putting body parts under the floorboards. It does show him taking a head out of a boiling pot at one point, which he would do. Shows him about to finally dismember Joe's body. And again, the blue and gray discoloration of the decomposing body looks very good. Did do a good job with that. Meets a drug addict named Steven on the streets, like passing out. So he takes him to a diner to get food and then to his home. I do believe this is based on Steven Sinclair, who was 20 years old, his final victim. January 26th of 83. He was a heroin addict. We actually see him using heroin in his bathroom, which he did shoot up in Nilsen's bathroom. And then he went to the, which Nilsen found him on the streets, brought him to get a burger, then brought him to his home. used heroin, and then he was passing out in Nilsson's armchair. That's when Nilsson came up behind him with this specially made ligature with rope and a necktie. The movie just shows a necktie. He strangles him while he's in the armchair, so true. In real life, they actually had the Who's... in real life, they had the Who's Tommy album playing. And before he strangled him, he knelt down in front of him and said, "Oh, Stephen, here I go again." But other than that, pretty similar to real life. Shows that the toilets and plumbing is getting backed up, which, again, true. The movie shows it all taking place in one home, where in real life he had his home on Melrose Avenue, then the one in the gardens. He didn't do any flushing at Melrose. It shows a neighbor calling a plumber, and Jordan looking shocked and worried when he sees the plumber or overhearing. In real life, Nilsson was in on it. He wrote a letter to the plumber or to the landlord. He wrote a letter saying that he needed help with the plumbing. So I'm guessing he did that to not look suspicious. And then it shows him going outside to where there's like the drain cover and seeing how back, I think he was trying to clear some of it out, and then he dumped his bag of organs into it. And the organs look decent, which I think that was accurate, which I know after the plumber left, because the plumber said you should probably call the police to the landlord, because of the smell and how it looked. He called his supervisor. They looked at it. It was towards the end of the night, so we'll come back tomorrow. Nilsson overheard, and he said, "It looks like someone flushed their KFC." But while they were gone that night, he went and he cleared out the blockage, which I'm guessing that's what that scene was. So when they came out the next day, they saw that it was cleared, but they noticed in a pipe there was some smaller bones that they thought looked kind of human. I read in some places they found a human eye, and that was definitely an alert. They brought the bones to a pathologist who said these are human, possibly from, hand or fingers. Some of the fleshy parts that were left, it looked like bruises, like it was part of a neck. The pipe that they were in, they realized went to the top apartment. So they knew to go after a Dennis Nilsson, which then were caught up to the scene in the beginning of the film, with him waiting to be arrested, essentially. When in real life, Detective Chief Inspector Jay and two officers were waiting outside. Nilsson came home from work. They stopped him. They asked if they could go into his apartment, which again, it just shows him knocking on the door, and then it cuts back to the interrogation. In real life, he brought them into his apartment. They got the waft of death. They said they found human remains. He feigned shock. They knew he was full of it. So the guy said, "Don't mess with me. Where's the rest of the body?" To which he said, "You'll find them in plastic bags in the wardrobe." But they did look in the wardrobe, and they asked something like, "How long has this been going on for?" or "How much do you have?" And he says, "It's a long story. I want to tell you everything. I want to get everything off my chest, but not here, down at the police station." They arrested him. And Jay, thinking, okay, it can't be that many, he said, are these parts to one or two bodies? And that's when Dennis said 15 or 16 since 1978. Now, it doesn't show any of that. Really just shows a plumber talking to the landlord saying, "You don't need me, you need the police." And then, it shows the police going to arrest Dennis. It does show forensics people taking parts out of the drain still. So, and then it just ends with more of the interrogation, like asking if he feels sorry. He says, "Yes, deeply, I definitely do." which he's always been so cold and matter of factly. Uh, my memory's kind of fuzzy on what he actually said if he was sorry. But and then it ends with just shots of the apartment, and then it kind of pans over to show the floorboards open and this kitchen cabinet open, but they're both empty, and that's where he kept most of the body parts. And that's the film. I'm sure I'll have more to talk about and go over when I see the David Tennant series, but this is still a very solid film. For a film that's loosely based, and even where the main character has a different name, it still has enough to be a decently made a Dennis Nilsen film. I was actually surprised because I was not expecting it to be this accurate. Not that it's the most accurate thing in the world, but I was surprised by how much it did have in it. I thought the lead guy did a really good job acting. He looked enough like Dennis Nilsen to make it believable. Again, not as much as David Tennant, but I love the way it's looked. Love the way it looks. Excuse me. It's like 4 in the morning right now. I love just that gritty, low budget, raw, just sort of not quite documentary, but certainly like guerrilla style filmmaking with this unconventional look to help it give that voyeuristic look. Maybe the look would have helped. Maybe it wouldn't have lost its effectiveness and gone into exploitation, shock value territory if it had been gorier. I mean, maybe not blood going everywhere, but have body parts and organs everywhere. Maybe the way it looks would have still would have kept its effectiveness, but the amount that it has, I still thought was effective. And I know usually it'll open up with like an arrest interrogation. We're told through flashbacks. Maybe if it was told more straightforward, like Henry, like just chronological. I don't know, but I was impressed by it. I had a feeling I was gonna like this film anyway. I didn't even watch a trailer, but I was impressed and surprised. Not just the quality of film. It's definitely a double feature quality with Henry. And I was impressed by how much of Dennis Nilsen they actually put into the film. So I really liked it. And, I was going to say I'm a big fan of Dennis Nilsen, but I'm a big fan of his case. I've always been fascinated by his case and his story. Again, it's a top 15 story for me. So I'll definitely be checking out the David Tennant film or series as soon as I'm able to get that. I will be checking out and reviewing Memories of Murder, the Dennis Nilsen documentary on Netflix. And yeah, so definitely find a way to check this out. Go buy the physical copy. Buy the Arrow version. So yeah, really liked it. Cold Light of Day. I do have a few other serial killer films coming in, so stay tuned for those. And thank you for watching.